Hello and welcome to History Happened Everywhere.
The Verdict.
This is our after-show podcast where we look back at our previous episode, Russia. So if you haven't listened to that, go back and have a listen, or else there will be spoilers ahead. Judge, he's the judge.
Oh, don't, because that really does annoy me.
Shouldn't tell me that.
Yes, I know.
Hello and welcome to History Happened Everywhere, The Verdict. My name is Ryan Weir, and with me in the studio is the effervescent Peter Goddard.
Hello.
And on the telephone, from the 1920s, it's our headmaster and judge and jury, it's Mr. Paul Dersley.
Good evening.
How are you doing, Mr. Paul Dersley? Are you okay?
I'm okay. How are you? I think we have some unfinished business.
We do. We need to immediately get into this and get this out of the way. Let's have a quick recap because you gave me a grade, or you said you were going to give me a grade based on whether or not there was the jingle, the judge jingle.
Correct.
And there was no judge jingle.
Yes, there was.
No, there wasn't. You said you would be okay if there was a better version.
Yes.
You said do an improved one.
Which you didn't.
I went out and I hired a man.
This is a bespoke commission. This isn't.
I paid for this, Paul. I thought this wasn't just me just messing around. I hired a professional to sing a song, sting for us.
Lyrically, I saw some similarities.
Yeah, I did ask him to put some lyrics in to retain some element of the previous song.
Flavour, a little bit of the flavour.
But come on, like his bit at the end. All
rise
rise for the judge.
I see. Okay. Am I supposed to feel flattered?
No, you're supposed to give me the grade that I deserve.
No, don't say that.
Yeah, B minus.
Well, to be fair though, you never said B minus in the episode. You said B.
Yes, because you played that jingle twice.
Oh,
He's doubled down.
You got me.
Oh, that's a shame.
Okay, I'll give you a B, and that's it.
I feel like that's fair.
Also, it's a great song. I bet you've been humming it all week.
Now, the interesting thing is you will have a dilemma this week.
Ooh. I love a dilemma.
Because your choice will affect Pete's grade.
Oh, that's good. I like that. Well done.
This is not the moral maze. Come on, guys.
No, this is good. You've got drawn into this, Pete, with your smug smile, sitting there at the other side of this argument. Now you're drawn in. Right, let's crack on with this episode of The Verdict, because we're not talking about East Timor anymore. We are talking about Russia. So why don't you remind us, Pete, with our new regular feature, the 1 minute summary. I'm going to start the clock now.
Russia is big. It's very big. It's got tundra, steppes, mountains and more. It fills up a lot of the top right-hand corner of your map. In the early Middle Ages, it was populated by East Slavs. They were a group that was said to derive from one of Noah's 3 sons, a guy called Japheth. That is according to the Russian Primary Chronicle, a very old book by a monk called Nestor. The book also tells us about Zurich-Rus. Zurich-Rus is a Viking who was invited to rule Novgorod. This started the Rus dynasty that put the Rus into Russia. After Rurik, a guy called Oleg took charge for a bit, who conquered the neighbouring tribe called the Drevlians. Oleg dies, and then Rurik's son, Igor, he takes charge. Igor goes to the Drevlians and demanded that they double the tribute that they were paying him. They said no, and then they killed him, rather painfully. And then they had the cheek to ask his widow to marry their prince. Problem was, the widow was Olga of Kiev, and she chose vengeance. The first Drevlians to visit her, she buried them alive. The second, she burned alive in a bathhouse. Then she went to visit them. She hosted a big feast, and then when everyone was drunk, her men slaughtered all 5,000 of the guests. Finally, she waged plain old-fashioned war on them, eventually applied a cunning trick involving pigeons to burn their main city to the ground, and again killed everyone. Eventually, she converted to Christianity. She was the first Rus to do so, for which she was eventually made a saint. And that's Russia in the early Middle Ages.
That was
spoilers, last week's episode done. Summarised nicely, nice one, son. Now we're over to a young Dersley, who's gonna tell you what he thought of thee. He'll take you apart without any care. He's the lovely Paul Dersley. The lovely Paul Dersley. All right, Paul, so let's jump straight into a few questions. So, have you ever been to Russia?
No, I haven't.
All right. Ever wanted to go?
I wouldn't mind going to St. Petersburg, yes, and sort of looking around sort of the European part of Russia. I think, the further east you go, the less interest I have. Although saying that, I've always had a yearning to have a look at Vladivostok, this sort of European city right on the other side of Russia.
What's attractive about that, Vladivostok?
Well, just because...
Pretend I don't know anything about it.
Okay, that won't be difficult. And... Well, Vladivostok is at the end of that enormous railway line from Moscow, so it's a very European-type city on the Pacific.
The Pacific? Oh, right, it's over on that side.
Yeah, so it's about 6,000 miles away from Moscow. So the distance from London to Los Angeles.
Wow. That's amazing. Do you get there by the Trans-Siberian Express?
Yes. So that was sort of what found. Well, there obviously was a city there before, or a small town, but that's where the railway ended.
I do like the idea that there wasn't anything there, and they ended the railway and said, "We should probably build something here." We finished. We got to the end. So why would anyone come here? Oh, balls! Quick, make a city.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose there could have been warlike intentions as well, because it was sort of just before the Russo-Japanese War.
So how close have you got, though? Eastern European-wise, or Western? Or
how close have I got to Russia? Oh, Berlin? No. Budapest? Probably Budapest. Or Prague. I'm not sure which is closer, actually.
It's a really big place. That surprised me. I mean, I knew it was a large landmass. I didn't realise it took up 1/8 of the Earth's inhabited space.
Yeah,
and not a massive population. I was really surprised by how thinly populated it was relative to its size.
Well, yeah, you think about it, it's only twice the size of Britain population-wise.
Twice the size of Britain in all of that space.
And how many times the size of France was it?
32 Frances,
32 Frances, like so it'd be 50 Britons in terms of area.
Wow, that's a lot. We're all just taking a moment to appreciate
the vastness
of how big
that very much informed the Russian approach to war, didn't it? For a long time, what they would do is someone would attack them across the steppes.
Yeah.
And they would just withdraw and burn everything so that there were no crops or anything.
Yeah.
And withdraw until the attacking army just ran out of food and went home, basically. That was kind of the approach that they took a lot of times.
Oh, yeah.
So Russia includes Siberia, right?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
So, and Siberia is huge.
Mm. And cold.
And gold.
Cold,
yeah. But, right, so here's my point. America is big, but not as big. But America has Bigfoot. Does the Siberia have hidden animals that we don't know about as well? It's more likely, isn't it?
Well, I would answer that virtually every place on Earth has animals we don't know about, or creatures that we don't know about.
Really? Like Bigfoot?
I don't know what the statistics are, but something like they only think about less than half of the species around at the moment we know of.
What kind of animal would you want named after you then, Paul, if we discovered a creature? We were going to call it Creaturus Dersleus.
It'd be Dersley eye.
What do you mean? Oh, is that Latin, is it?
It has to be the genitive of Dersley.
The Dersley eye.
No, a parasite would be nice.
A parasite?
Like a new tapeworm.
I've got
newer,
Dersley
more
eye.
efficient tapeworm is Tapewormius Dersley eye.
But what about mammoths? Is it possible that there are like a lost herd of mammoth in the Siberian wilderness that no one knows about and they've been there lost to time and man?
No.
Why is that?
Because satellite images would have found them by now.
They're not that big.
I mean, they're literally called mammoths.
But if you can read a newspaper headline from a satellite, I think they're slightly larger than a newspaper.
You can't read a newspaper from space.
Well, you used to be able to read the headlines. I think now you could I reckon you could read 18-point text from space now.
So the Hubble telescope, right, that can see to the furthest part of the known...
Yes, it's not looking in the same direction, though.
No, but that's my point. So if you turned it around and pointed it at Earth, would it be just out of focus?
It would be out of focus. I think you couldn't change the focal length that much.
Oh, okay.
It's like, binoculars. There is a point at which you can't focus binoculars.
Yeah.
Which is usually about something like 20 foot.
But in Ryan's case, it's the building next door where the lady leaves her curtains open in the evenings.
Shh. She might be listening. Hello, Barbara. If you're listening. Paul, did you learn anything new? Was there anything that stood out for you that you were like, oh, I did not know that?
I knew a few of the facts. I didn't know the details. So I sort of knew about Kievan Rush, Muscovy, the expansion eastward of Russia, basically, yes. There were a couple of inaccuracies regarding Russia and the Soviet Union that Pete mentioned.
Okay, I guess we'll come to those. But what struck me was how little it seems is actually known of that period of time. Dark Ages, nothing really written down. The podcast was based principally on what was it called again, Pete? I really struggle with this.
The Russian Primary Chronicle.
Which sounds like a newspaper.
So it's also known as the Tale of Bygone Days, which is rather more romantic.
Yeah, it's sort of quite interesting as well, isn't it? Because it's like the Ghana thing where Russia sort of started not in Russia.
Yeah, elsewhere. Yeah,
and moved.
A migrating country.
Sort of ironically, it started in the Ukraine.
Is it the Ukraine or is it Ukraine?
Oh, that's an interesting debate. We call it the Ukraine, although Ukraine calls themselves Ukrainia, and they don't really like the definite article associated with their country. I don't know why. I think it's quite nice to be
I read that the of the Ukraine, which they do not like, it's Ukraine from a Ukrainian person's perspective, is believed to be derived from a Russian attempt to delegitimize it as a country of its own in its own right.
Oh, okay.
I don't know exactly how having the on the front achieves that, but that's what I heard.
It makes it sound like there's other Ukraines, and they're just saying this is the one.
Yeah, I guess
it's the Ukraine.
If you said the Scotland, right?
Yeah,
Scotland is a place.
The
Scotland is like the Lake District. The Lake District is just an area.
Okay, so
Scotland is a country.
Okay, so what countries do have that in it? The United States of America?
No.
I would say I'm going to visit the United States of America. I wouldn't say I'm going to United States of America. Actually, I might. No, I said that.
Wow, that was a journey, wasn't it?
It was a roller coaster, wasn't it?
You would say the US, but colloquially you'd say America, which is of course totally wrong because that's the name of a continent.
It is, yeah.
Named after.
I call it Yankee Land.
We know who it's named after now, don't we?
Yes, America Vespucci.
And not the other guy you keep telling us about.
Fine.
Bobby America, or whatever his name was.
Bobby America.
And some fell on stony ground.
Are there any countries with the in the name?
The Gambia.
The Gambia.
Gambia, yeah, that is one.
Well, that's because it's a river as well as a country.
Okay.
So then arguably Paraguay should be the Paraguay, but it's not.
Let's talk about the Dark Ages, though, Paul.
Yes.
So Pete mentioned about how the Dark Ages was called the Dark Ages because nothing was written down. So we're unclear as to what actually happened. We know that things did happen through archaeology and
guesswork.
Educated guesswork.
Educated guesswork. So you've got the Russian Primary Chronicle, but it mixes fiction with fact. How can we trust it as a reliable source of history?
Well, that's a difficult one, isn't it? It's like lots of things of that time seem to mix fact with fiction or myth.
Do they start that way, or do they just get changed and do they evolve over time?
I would argue that the Russian Primary Chronicle is the Fox News of the early Middle Ages. It knows what its paymaster wants to hear. It says what its paymaster wants to hear, although probably no one ever explicitly says, I demand you say this exact thing. It's all a lot of unspoken, oh, here's a book you'll enjoy. Oh, I very much enjoy this book, because it tells me that I'm definitely the rightful ruler of this area.
Yes, that's probably right. You do need, history does need various primary sources to be weighed off against each other. And that's why history can be controversial, of course.
But I want to ask you about outsourcing of leadership. This was something that both Pete and I had a little
we disagreed.
Conflict about. We did. We disagreed, didn't we?
So the Eastern Slavs of Novgorod were bickering amongst each other as a bunch of tribes fighting, and they felt like they couldn't get their act together. So allegedly they went north to the Vikings and said, hey guys, who wants to rule us? And this is where Rurik Russ said, I'll do it with my two brothers, and came down and took charge. This is known as the Norman version of events. Mm-hmm. Against which the Soviet Union in particular preferred the anti-Norman view, which was that actually the Eastern Slavs were more than capable of ruling themselves.
Yeah. So how do you feel about that, Paul? And also, are there any other examples that you can think of where that might also be the case, where people have outsourced their leadership to other people?
Arguably, it's quite a logical thing to do if you're sort of quite an intelligent society or peaceful society, where you sort of said, well, actually, you said, but there's, of course, the unintended consequences, which would always happen.
A town full of Vikings, specifically.
Well, you think that might be a problem? Well, aren't they going to want to protect the town that they're looking after?
Well, what's in it for them is the thing. It may be one thing saying, oh, could you please rule us?
How is it any different than doormen or bouncers in a nightclub?
Well, I think it's
They're
vastly
not going to
different.
come in and just take over the nightclub.
The way I see this going down is like India, where the British arrive and say, we're going to side with you, person who's in a bicker with his local tribe, and you can be my representative, and I will give you all the power of the British Empire to support you in your conflicts with your neighbours, but you're the king, right? But they weren't going out and inviting those people in. They showed up and had their muscle, and that was just their approach. That's, to me, what would most likely have happened.
Well, yeah, it's a sort of protectorate, isn't it? But it's like an inverse protectorate. The protectorate is what you were saying, big country comes to little country and says, we'll look after you for defence and various other things, but you can look after yourself for everything else. Whereas this is sort of almost the opposite of that, asking somebody else to come in and use their skills.
It just strikes me that if you're a village and you don't necessarily have a fighting force, and you've been perhaps attacked on several occasions, and you can't defend yourself, the only logical answer is to get people in. It's like the Wild West. You get,
and
someone to come and protect your town.
Were they quite ethnically close anyway? If they were similar, they may have felt some sort of kinship.
Mm.
But yeah, it's very difficult, that, isn't it? Because who wrote this? Russia has a perfectly valid point of saying, why should they have done this? Whereas, the other one saying, oh, of course we did it. And it's just willy waving, isn't it?
Yeah, I was less convinced by we came from Noah part. That felt like a much even bigger stretch than the inviting people to rule you.
Well, I wonder if it's been extrapolated over time and that actually it's like house guests, where somebody's like, oh, I should come and see you. And you're like, yeah, that'd be great. We'd love to see you. And then they end up staying for a lot longer than you perhaps intended.
So you think it's a sort of awkward politeness situation?
Yeah. Like, guys, really, we don't, you can leave anytime you like. It's
you are the chief now.
Well, that's the English passive aggressive, isn't it? To try and get rid of somebody.
Unlike the Drevlians, who were aggressive.
Yes.
Let's talk about being torn in two by birch trees.
Let's do that. Gruesome death of Igor.
Oh,
what did you think about that?
Yes. Well, they did come up with some interesting ways of torture, didn't they? And execution.
So tying someone down, putting rope attaching it to 2 trees and then ripping them apart. How long do you think you'd last? Do you think you'd be alive for long?
Probably longer than you think.
Really?
Do you think there's a split second where it's fun?
You had to use the word split second.
And you're like, this is awful.
Yeah, you think at least it's relatively quick. It's like I don't know whether it's apocryphal or not. I know that they have tested it to some extent. The one with you put a fast-growing piece of bamboo under somebody and tie them down and let it slowly drill its way through their body.
When you say they've tested this, who signed up to test that?
Well, a dead pig, basically.
I don't think they signed up for it either, personally.
And it did pierce it and go through it.
Yeah, I bet.
So that would be quite slow. It's sort of a bit like the death by 1,000 cuts, isn't it?
Is that a thing?
Yeah.
I've heard the expression, but is that an actual thing?
Yeah, that's what happens every week when you edit.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
Yes, it was, lots of little cuts. So the first few aren't really noticeable, and then more and more and more, and it gets worse and worse and worse.
So do you just bleed to death?
Yes, you would ultimately bleed to death slowly, because probably if they do it right, if right is the correct word, possibly some of the earlier cuts have started to heal up, so you can go back and open them again.
Anyway, moving on.
People were cruel, weren't they?
Yes.
They're not brilliant today.
Well, yes, they were from our point of view. It was just, I know it's a cliche, but it was a different world then.
It's like around this time they were doing blood eagling as well, weren't they?
I don't know what that is.
Eagle. It's an execution style where you would tie someone down and then break the ribs and then open their chest up while they're alive, pull the lungs out over their shoulders so it looked like wings.
Oh, I see, yes.
So you look like a blood eagle.
So a bit like drawn and quartered.
That you die?
Well, when you're drawn and quartered, the body is opened and quartered and it's still alive for quite a bit of that time.
So, anyway, on the subject of a different time, the topic was equality. We had a bit about the relations between men and women in various tribes, ranging from respectfully the women are chattels to I will race around town with women attached to my wagon. Yeah. And obviously we had the mighty Olga of Kiev.
Ah, yes. I thought we'd talk about her.
So it's International Women's Month, I think. It was certainly International Women's Day a couple of days ago. So it was quite lucky in a way that we corresponded by chance with that.
That's the Derslater for you.
That is the Derslater. The Derslater knows things. What have you put in that programming, Paul?
Well, I didn't because you chose Russia.
There's the Derslater playing 5D chess. I wanted you to pick Russia.
Been outwitted by a spreadsheet. Not for the first time.
Do you think that what Olga did was an overreaction?
It probably was an overreaction. After the second one, it was an overreaction, and then the
burning in the bath.
The pigeons were amusing.
They were amusing. I have a question about that, actually. We were talking during the episode about how she tied sulfur to the pigeons, and that set the roofs on fire. How does sulfur work?
It wouldn't be sulfur. It would be something of which sulfur would have been a main component.
Oh, so like a combination of...
It would have been a combination
sort of
of various things like... the famous Greek fire, which was always a myth that people were wanting to create, which was some sort of substance that could spontaneously ignite when you threw it, and it landed.
It was Archimedes' napalm.
It's like, remember, I don't know whether you used to do it, but nitrogen triiodide, which is something that you can make quite easily at school, which is incredibly unstable. And so you used to make that, didn't you? And you used to... Whenever it was touched or went close to, even wafting air over it, it used to explode with quite a loud bang for what it was. And
wow.
there was a fad at school for people doing that until it was banned.
But if you're attaching it to a bird, right, and you know you don't want that bird to set fire until it's got back to the house, hasn't it got to have something to do with the house as being the catalyst?
Well, I looked it up when I read about it. I was like, well, how does sulfur... Yeah. Just because the way it's written, it's as if the birds were carrying like flaming logs back home.
But that can't possibly be the case.
Which seemed unlikely.
Yeah.
Because I suspect if you set fire to a bird, it doesn't then immediately go home and settle down. So I just came to the assumption that what it did was at least create a highly flammable environment, and in the early medieval times there were probably more flames in general, and therefore everything went up very quickly. That's kind of how my takeaway for it.
Yeah, but a bird wouldn't fly into a flame, though, would it? It would do everything to avoid a flame.
No, but if it nestles in the eaves of the house and in the dovecote, and there's enough sparky stuff around, that it then goes up. That was kind of how I couldn't figure out how it would actually set on fire these various bits.
Yeah.
Yeah, possibly it's something that if there was a bit of phosphorus in it, and then maybe you get something like a match head. So as soon as the bird landed and walked on a bit of stone or something, that created the spark.
It's basically a swan vesta sellotaped to the leg of a pigeon.
Exactly. Well, no, you'd need one of those old Promethean matches, wouldn't you?
A Promethean match?
I don't know what that is. Is that one that just lights on anything?
Yes,
Like on the back of my shoe, and if I was a 1940s gangster.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether that was a Promethean match, but the Promethean match, which was some of the early matches, were actually like a very, very thin glass vial that had substances in them that would, as soon as they were open to the air, would spontaneously combust.
No way! I've never heard of this.
Yeah, they were the earliest. They were the earliest form of match. Of course, they were incredibly expensive, but
Right.
they served the purpose. They served it well, but I suppose the problem would have been
Incredibly dangerous.
if you had them in your pocket and someone sort of slapped you on the back or something, you would go up in flames.
Wow, that's amazing. It's like a glow stick, but a burn stick. Very good. Right, so mistakes. This is your opportunity, Paul, to haul
Yes, I was
over the coal.
surprised that Pete didn't know the difference between the Soviet Union and Russia.
I'm not sure that's an entirely fair characterization. I was very clear that Russia was... what I wasn't clear on was whether Russia counted as a country or not.
Well, no, Russia was first among equals, I suppose, is the crass phrase. Because Russia, in Soviet times, it was known as the RFSFR, the Russian Federal Socialist Republic, which was one of the 15 republics of the Soviet Union, like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and all of those. But it just happened to be by far the largest and had most say over the rest of the country. A bit like, Prussia in Imperial Germany.
Yeah, we didn't get Russia in the Olympics, did you? It was USSR in the Olympics.
Yes, because you could argue that Russia is to the Soviet Union like England is to the United Kingdom.
Well, exactly, and England's not a country.
What? How is England not a country?
It's the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is a country.
Well, it's a country, but not a state.
Wait, what's England then? How is England not a country?
It's a region.
England is a country, but it's not a sovereign state.
So what's a country? What is a country if it's not a sovereign state?
Don't try and tell me the country I'm in isn't a country, Pete. That really hurts my head.
Well, it's one of those strange cases, and I suppose the Soviet Union was always one which had all these parts which were supposedly autonomous, but they competed under one flag, just as England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland compete under the Union Jack, whereas arguably they're separate countries. But then you get the situation, of course, whereas in football they each play with their own. England is a country in terms of football and rugby.
So what is a country? I'm going to come back to this. What is a country exactly? I understand what a state is. A state is a kind of recognised global administrative unit.
A state is de jure, isn't it, by law, set by law. I think you could argue that a country is just de facto. It is, by common consent, England is a country. Used to be a state, of course, but England being quite a martial state, liked to conquer other places.
Because you'd probably say Wales is just a principality and not a country, presumably.
I would say it was a country.
Well, yeah, Wales is a country or a nation. All of these words are interchangeable: state, country, nation, region, province.
It's like when you were talking about that book, the Russian Principal Primary Chronicle, and how you were saying there's a codex and a...
Oh, the definition of the book. When is a book not a book?
Yes,
I
didn't know that. I didn't know that. So one is just an index and one is more of a...
story.
What say, an encyclopedia.
Well, also, because the codex is a pre-book. So technically, by the things I was reading, a book is only a paper. Only a paper book is a book.
Only a paper book is a book?
Yeah, and a pre-paper book is a codex.
Wait, what's a pre-paper book?
Vellum, like animal skin, or
oh, I see.
Parchment, or but which is also animal skin, or papyrus. Those would be considered codexes, or birch bark, or gold leaf, if you will,
or anything.
Anything non-paper is apparently
not a book.
Is paper. So then there's the other question of a scroll is obviously not a book, so a book implies some kind of spine, some kind of folding. I don't know. What is a book? It's one of those questions that seems so obvious, and as soon as you start scratching at it, you're like, well, is then a scroll a book? No, it's not a book. Why not? Because it doesn't fold, I guess, open. There's not pages, so pages are required for a book. I would say probably yes.
Wow. So we've learned a book is not a book.
Yeah, and a country is not a country.
Tokyo wasn't Tokyo.
Nobody knows what anything is anymore.
Ghana wasn't where Ghana was.
And Russia wasn't where Russia was. So basically everything you know is a lie.
Oh, my head hurts so much.
All your certainties are gone.
I just don't get it. I want to talk to you about the pronunciation of Russ. I don't think it's Russ.
I would say Russ. I would say Russ.
Okay. I was going to say Roos.
It probably is Roos, but it's one of those things. If they didn't write anything down, how the hell do we know how they sounded it?
Now, do we say? I say Belarus, right? But Russia. So there's two candidates there that are pretty plausible.
No, Belarus is just basically a transcription of White Russia.
Belarus, right? But we say Rus, not Russ. Whereas Russia, we say Russ.
Japheth, not Japheth.
Yeah, I'll put my hands up to that one. Japheth. Japheth sounds like someone you meet at a gym.
I feel really bad picking you up on this because this is a terrible thing. I get these things wrong all the time as well. I was just listening back to it and I'm like, that can't be right. Japheth.
But did you then check, or are you simply claiming I'm wrong?
No, I'm just simply pointing out. I guess I'm asking Paul because he seems to be the knowledgeable source on all of this stuff.
Isn't the name Japheth? But I know very little about biblical stuff. It's an area I try to avoid fantasy.
What I found interesting, because obviously I looked into Noah's sons, as it were, and there was Japheth and Ham and Shem. They were the three sons of Noah, and they
Ham
all
didn't do
had
well out of those names, did he?
Ham. Well, arguably Japheth.
Yeah, Ham is not a good name to give to a Jewish man, is it?
No. It was his sister, Cheese and Onion.
Well, they all. So anyway, the three sons of Noah then all had various numbers of sons themselves, which tells us that either A,
didn't they ever have any daughters?
Well, this is precisely my question, which is either that everyone was spontaneously reproducing in some sort of mitotic manner, or in fact there were women around that didn't even get named in the Bible because they didn't count.
Well, people survived the flood. They didn't actually kill everyone.
Yeah, but they didn't get written down about, did they? Everyone gets named except any of the women. Equality-wise, not a win.
But the
flood is quite interesting as well, isn't it? The flood is quite interesting because, as Pete alluded to, there are records of inundations.
Well, we've talked about this. We talked about this on the last one in East Timor.
Oh, yes, the change.
If you're looking back at historic floods, then surely 120 metres worth of water flooding the entire Sunderland.
Yeah. You'd notice.
Yes.
You might notice that and write that down.
Yeah, I've seen various theories of things that might have explained, but certainly the tales of a flood really go back to all of those tales of antiquity seem to have a deluge at some point, which rather implies something grim happened.
Before we move on, I do want to ask Paul, in Russia, Pete was telling us last week that there are carnivorous forests there. Have you ever been to or seen a carnivorous forest?
No.
You know what time it is?
It's just
It's that time, and I have to decide.
What tune goes in?
Yeah, does the tune happen now or
I think
not?
I should have some influence.
Okay, tell me.
Okay, so we'll do the tune. We'll have to consult after this and retrospectively put it in. So, Paul, you're not going to know what we're going to do now, but
Right.
we should put in the tune now.
Have you finished?
Yeah, we finished. So, Paul, it's that time. Let's hear it.
Let's judge the things we does.
Let's. Well, how? Let's start. How did you think it? How did you think Pete did this week?
Very good.
Wow!
What
a surprise! What a shock!
I thought it hung together really well. He got the time frame all the time, and sort of the bit about Olga was getting a lot about equality in. You might want to shut your ears, Ryan.
Go on. Do it. Just do it. Pull the plaster off.
A.
Yes!
I mean, thanks, man.
It was close between A and A minus, and I think it's probably the best one so far.
Wow,
I'm
that's
so
high
absurdly pleased by that.
Yeah.
I'm almost embarrassed to admit.
I think it just worked. Now, what about that wine list you were talking about earlier, Pete?
Yes. There'll be a nice Malbec coming your way.
In all seriousness, I loved that last episode, the Russia episode. I really enjoyed it. I thought that you brought in some really fascinating information and carried it off well. As Paul said, the equality side is all the way through. The time is there. Russia was there. The whole three things are there. The only thing I do want to point out is last week we were going to carry across a minus mark. And I hate to bring it up.
Oh,
but
man.
I think you might remember that, Paul. We were going to carry across a
I sort of remember it, but I can't remember the details.
We're going to have to do a rewind and see what it said.
You said Ascension Island on the podcast, Pete. Is that true, or is it Pitcairn?
It's Pitcairn. Did I say Ascension?
You did, yeah. In 1789, Captain Bligh arrives.
Oh, right.
Know him?
Yes, I do.
Where's he from?
The Bounty.
Yeah. Who was he?
He was the captain who was very disliked by his crew, who mutinied, kicked him off his boat, and the survivors ended up in a place called Ascension Island.
Well, it would have been one hell of a journey to Ascension Island, as it's in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean.
So, can you take a point off of Pete, please?
Well, I have to hold it in. I have to hold it in debit.
I feel this is duplicitous behaviour on your part, you sneak.
Hey, no, I've just praised you. I think it's exactly the right grade, but I would be doing a disservice to truth and accuracy if I wasn't to point out. We would just get lots of complaints from people saying, last episode on the verdict, you got carried over a minus grade.
I feel like you have just slithered out of a horse's skull. Yeah.
It's a fair point. But
He's just been thrown around your neck.
hey, I'm just the messenger.
I'm going to kill you.
Sorry, what? Paul, anything to say on this? Come on, you're the grader. You can dismiss last week's easily, or you can carry through the thing that we agreed last week with certainty that that's what would happen.
In this written contract that I have here.
Sorry, Ryan. It's the only A I've ever given. I've given a couple of A minuses before, and I think you even got one, Ryan.
I've got to tell you, I try and be cool about the grade thing, but I'm bursting with pride right now.
I can see it on your face.
God,
That's wonderful.
On
That's
the
really
downside,
good.
it might just be an indication of how rarely anyone says
Are you
nice things to
speaking through gritted teeth?
No, I'm not. No, and do you know the reason why I'm not speaking through gritted teeth? And that is because I saw this coming. I actually went and got my prophecy read.
I see.
Was that at that place on the high street?
It was, highly profitable.
Why would you have wasted the money on a fact that was obvious?
Well, okay, so we've talked about this briefly before, but let's just jump straight into this. Why doesn't fate exist?
Because because
why can't I have a prophecy?
Because the world is not deterministic.
So why do prophecies exist? Why do people believe in fate?
I could be flippant and say because they're stupid, but I won't. It's because I think most, if not a lot or everybody, needs to believe in something.
There is something there's a very human need to believe that the world is in some way predictable, because otherwise it's just a chaotic nightmare of randomness. And that no one wants to live in that situation.
And, it's all, again, it's all relative, isn't it? Because yes, I could tell you for a fact that the sun will come up tomorrow, and I could tell you for a fact that you won't win the lottery this weekend.
Prophecies. Paul's prophecies.
Part of me now expects Ryan to go out and buy about £10,000 worth of lottery tickets in a desperate attempt to prove you wrong. This could ruin you, Ryan.
Bankrupt yourself.
It's true. It's true. Right, let's end on a prophecy then, Paul. Give us a prophecy for next week. Next week's The Verdict will be around my episode, which is on Kazakhstan, and it's during 1517 to 1648. Oddly specific time period, but those are the years that I got. Thanks, Dersley. And it's our Easter special.
You won't get as high a grade as Pete got this week.
That's Paul's prophecy. I like this as a section. Paul's prophecies.
Paul's prophecies.
Well, if we do that, it's always going to be you're going to get a
bad grade. C. Yeah, I get it. Yeah. Right, that is the show for this week. Thank you all for listening. If you'd like to get in touch about any of the things that we've talked about in this episode, and I'm sure there's a few things that some people might have a thought about, you can do that. And you can get in touch with us through Twitter. Our account there is at hhepodcast. Or you can email us at hhepodcast@gmail.com. And if you do, you never know, me and Pete, we might mention you on our future shows.
Now, if you really want to name check, you can definitely feature on a show by rating and reviewing the show on Apple Podcasts, such as the mighty Evo, who very kindly left us a review. Thank you, Evo. That's excellent and very kind of you. It helps us. It helps others find the show. And in the meantime, if you don't want to do that, you can find us and join discussions in Facebook and Reddit. And you can subscribe to those and go to Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn, all of which we put a little hit of History Happened Everywhere, some videos sometimes, almost every day.
And we're going to be back again next week with a new place, a new time, a new topic, which is Kazakhstan, and our Easter episode.
If you need something in the meantime, we do have a growing archive of old shows. You can access those and download them and listen to them whenever you want on YouTube, your podcast provider, or at hhepodcast.com.
That's right. We've got ones like East Timor,
Mozambique,
Uruguay,
Turkey,
Kiribati,
Russia.
And that's it. So, Paul, you there? You still there? You haven't fallen asleep?
Yes, sorry.
It'll wake you up. Fallen asleep next to the fire.
D-.
No, that's next week. Anyway, Paul, thank you very much for joining us again. Your opinion, your judgment is welcome as always.
Pleasure.
Any last words for our audience before you disappear for another 2 weeks back into your hole in the ground like a mole?
Well, just live your insignificant little lives as normal.
Encouraging words there from Paul Dersley.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. Okay, and so all that's left to say is...
You've been listening to...
History Happened Everywhere.
The Verdict. I think the second verse of Rule Britannia goes, "Thy nations not so great as thee must in their turn to tyrants fall, whilst thou shalt flourish great and free, the dread and envy of them all." Rule Britannia.
Wow. Did you just look that up?
No, it was in my head.
Wow, you have a lot of things in your head.
Well, last night at the proms, you can't be pulling out your lyric sheet, can you?
Well, that's true. Oh, right. Do you know any poetry? You recite well, by the way.
I go in and out on poetry.
Do you? Okay.
It is quite poncy, but it is also a distillation of thoughts down to, well, a minimal level. You're saying something. You're saying
but with
something
as much,
in a few
but with
words.
meaning and
it's sort of maybe like a haiku or something.
Yeah, it sort of strikes me as like cooking. It's like the ingredients in a recipe. You pick the best ingredients in the most colourful of the fruit and vegetables and the choicest cuts of meat.
Or sort of in mathematics, the prime numbers.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, I've got a poem for you. I used to memorise it, but now I've had to look it up. I'm sharing it with you because it's one of my favourite poems.
Go on then.
It is by E.E. Cummings.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Me Up At Does.
Okay.
Me up at does, out of the floor, quietly stare, a poisoned mouse. Still, who alive, is asking, what have I done that you wouldn't have?
But what does that mean?
Looking up at me out of the floor is a mouse who's been poisoned, asking me, what did I do that you wouldn't have?
Oh, why are you poisoning me?
Yeah.
So if you'd have been me, you'd have done exactly the same. So how come you're in a position to kill me?
Right? What did I do that you wouldn't have?
Right. All I wanted was food.
Right? I'm just trying to feed my family here.
Are you about to cry?
No.
Okay.
I also enjoy...
Limericks.
I used to write poems down and in my poems I like. The thing is, I hate poetry, but when it's good, it's really good.
Yes, I think I'm sort of with you on that. Although I do like limericks.
Do you? Do you know any good ones?
Well, they're incredibly difficult to do. So let's have a think. Saint Olga, a famous old Russian, a fan of spontaneous combustion, set forth sulphurous fire from birds flying higher to deliver Dravalian destruction. How is that?